Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. The public discourse in this country in the last few years has seen repeated mention of crony capitalism and its ill effects. The discourse is also centered around how the few rich and influential corporates have cornered most of the natural resources, licenses and contracts, swelling their coffers at the cost of others. Crony capitalism also implies lack of level playing field and curbing competition. Now, no one less than the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Raghuram Rajan, has also flagged concerns about crony capitalism and how it is harming not just the business atmosphere, but also is slowing down growth. In the last couple of years, the previous UPA government came in for severe criticism for encouraging crony capitalism. The question is whether we will see in the coming months and years any attempt to curb it and how it can be curbed. We will discuss all this today with Professor Arun Kumar of Center for Economic Studies and Planning, JNU. Ajay Dua will be joining us soon. Dr. Didar Singh, Secretary General of FICCI. Dilip Cherian, Founder, Perfect Relations, and Vivian Fernandes, Senior Business Journalist. Welcome to all of you. Professor Arun Kumar, is crony capitalism a result of post-liberalization policies in this country?
No, crony capitalism has existed in India for a very long time. If you go back to the 60s, licenses were being cornered. You had the debate in Parliament, when it was said that the umbrella holding of pattern in the corporate sector was resulting in increase in monopoly power. And there was this famous debate between Ram Manohar Lohia and Nehru also in Parliament, where he accused Nehru of socialism failing because of increasing disparities in the country. And then you had the Hazari Commission set up, and the Hazari Commission report came out showing how the umbrella pattern of cross-holding of corporate sector was increasing. And here one must point out that corruption was also simultaneously growing. And the link between the corporate sector and the business community, that was growing. And I would also like to point out that it's not only in India that this happened, it also happened in Japan. Right. And Japan was therefore called the Japan Incorporated. It also happened in South Korea, where the link between business and corporate sector is very close. And along with that, you notice that corruption was growing in South Korea. It was also growing in Japan. Number of prime ministers in Japan had to resign. Number of presidents in South Korea had to resign. So this is a phenomenon that has been growing, I think, all over the world. Capitalism's growth has been accompanied with a kind of crony capitalism. But where does the problem lie today? The problem lies today in the fact that it has increased enormously, right. Far more complex than it used to be. So the black economy, which was 4 to 5% of GDP according to Caldor in 1955-56, has become more than 50%. So it has increased in scale dramatically. And that's why you find that the
recently there was a report saying that 75% of the GDP of this country is black.
But you see that report is a bit misleading because it counting.
You have done a study on black money.
So according to my estimate, it's more than 50%, and of that 10% goes abroad, but 90% stays here. But the point I was trying to make was slightly different, and that is that if the black economy is 50% of GDP, it has to be systematic and systemic. How does it become systematic and systemic? When the businessmen, the politicians and the corrupt bureaucracy and the executive, they form a nexus. And that's what you see whether in radio tapes or whether you see in, for instance, the coal allocation of blocks, you see in 2G allocation, you see in the way some companies do very well, others don't do well. And this stands to reason because if the corporate sector is able to control policy, it will benefit itself. So all corporate sector and business, they try to see that the political influence that they can command should keep on increasing. And they try to maneuver in that direction. And that's what has increased dramatically after 1991, in spite of liberalization, in spite of things supposedly being more dependent on the market. But that is where the failing is, and that's why the investment rate has declined. It had peaked in 2008 at 38%. It has declined to roughly 30%. And that's the reason why the economy has slowed down systematically quarter after quarter in the last 12 quarters.
So Raghuram Rajan has a point when he has raised concerns and flagged these concerns. Correct. Let me get Mr. Didar Singh. Mr. Didar Singh, you people belonging to the industry, how seriously do you think, in the estimation of the industrialists, the corporates, the businessmen, how seriously does crony capitalism affect business atmosphere?
See, let's be very clear on one basic factor in this entire debate or in this entire discussion, which is that India, like many other parts in the world, is a market economy. Now, in a market economy, it is in nobody's interest to get into crony capitalism, as whether we are looking at it as an industry body, whether we look at it as economists or academics, nobody supports the aspect of crony capitalism. Yet the fact remains that it finds itself into the economy in a situation where there are distortions within that economy. And those distortions, I think, are very clear and they go across the board. I mean, when you look at the very business of ease of doing business in India, we know how poor it is. The moment these aspects come in, infrastructure, logistics, the issue of getting on with your business, that's where the whole business of the corruption comes into it. Other aspects of approvals, delays, all of it begins to come into it, and it impacts business. It is not in the interest of business to actually go for any such thing which distorts the economy, such as crony capitalism, but probably the facts of the way the country is developing, emerging economies, you can call it developing economies, whatever. But we've also seen it, as was correctly pointed out, in Japan, Korea, other places. It's a part of the maturing of an economic system. We don't support it, but we have to take steps to handle it.
Okay. Dilip, the industry says we don't support it, but they are the beneficiaries. I mean, maybe not all of them, because of which there is crony capitalism also implies that there is no level playing field, the lack of the competition is curbed or killed. So, but still the industry says that we don't support it, but it exists. Why and how does it exist?
I think the issue is twofold. There's one issue which is to do with corruption, and the other is to do with how pervasive it is. We all know that corruption is pretty much pervasive, but this is something different. I think we need to separate the two things of crony capitalism and corruption at this point.
We have to.
Because what is happening in crony capitalism is actually that it's a successor to, as Raghuram Rajan has said, to crony socialism, which used to exist during the socialist time. And in fact, today what is happening is that we have both running parallelly. You have crony socialism going on and you have crony capitalism going on, and we'll get to that. But the issue is that when you have government involved in the allocation of scarce resources, whether it's land, coal, oil fields or spectrum, and it is not allowed to do it transparently for a variety of reasons or chooses not to do, then the options for potential manipulation of the system are very high. Beneficiaries are venal politicians as equally venal executives. So both are very
in the private sector, among the corporates, among the industrialists.
Now, this among industrialists,
because we always only hear about venal politician and venal bureaucrat. We don't hear much about venal executives.
No, when I meant executives, I meant bureaucrats. I meant the executive, in the executive side of the government. So there has to be a giver and there has to be an asker, not just a taker, an asker. So you're creating the opportunity for asking by having a non-level, non-transparent playing field, and that is the real problem. The problem is that in allocation of as simple a thing as, for example, DDA allocating shopping lots, shops in a thing, unless you make it transparent and have in some market mechanism which allows price discovery, you're just creating the opportunity for crony capitalism of some kind. We make the mistake of thinking that crony capitalism is only the names we have in the backdrop, the top 10 industrialists. It goes much, much further. In every state, in every city, for example, the contracts to get road relaying is also an example of crony capitalism.
Absolutely.
It's the same contractors who get it year after year, who ensure that the waters or the rains sweep it away, and the same guy gets it year after year irrespective, because the system is not transparent. And to my mind, that is the big danger. And we have to recognize that the cost is to the consumer. We think that the consumer is not paying the cost. The consumer is the one who ends up paying the cost.
Crony capitalism, the worst affected is the common man,
the common man.
Vivian, everybody talks about ease of doing business in this country, which is at the lowest, going by any of the studies. You think that is what has created it? Or, you have been interacting with any number of industrialists and corporates and all in your career. You think they also are quite comfortable with this?
No, first of all, I think, politics has become the best investment in this country. the Association for Democratic Rights, it did a survey of 163 re-elected MPs out of the 543 MPs in Parliament, and it found that their wealth had increased by 137% on average. Now, this of course conceals, peaks and of course troughs. So I would imagine that politics has become the most lucrative, best investment in this country. And secondly, you have election funding also, which demands money to be raised from corporates. So that is why you have this nexus between business people and politicians. I would say that since liberalization, there has been substantial improvement in the competitive atmosphere. And the companies that formed the 30 share index of the Sensex in the 1990s perhaps are not all present in the index at the moment. There has been a churn. We also find that in many sectors like aviation or broadcasting or even telecoms, there has been a lot of competition. So I would say that we are not capitalist, but we are less free than we should be. Giving an index which...
What do you mean less free?
Less free. I'll give an example. For example, Raghuram Rajan, I think, who's our governor of the Reserve Bank, and Ruchi Sharma of Morgan Stanley, they have compiled an index where they have said that you can measure crony capitalism by the number of billionaires per $1 trillion of the economy.
Right.
And by that measure, I find that India has 32 billionaires per $1 trillion compared to Russia, which has 52. So Russia is number one. India seems to be somewhere over there. And The Economist recently compiled an index of crony capitalism and it ranked India 9th. Russia was 2nd, South Korea was 5th, and USA was 15th. So, there is substantial scope for improving the competitive atmosphere in this country. And the areas where you find crony capitalism the most are in the infrastructure sectors, commodity sectors, public-private partnerships. I think are the main. Public-private partnerships are just another name for transferring public money into private pockets. And you have the example of Mumbai Airport, you have the example of Delhi Airport, the various road projects
Delhi
in this
metro
country.
to the airport metro.
No, I'm talking about Delhi Airport, where, for example, a previous minister allowed user development fees to be charged of consumers, even though the airport was not ready, and this money went to the developer. The developer was not providing a service. The consumers were paying a user development fee when the government should have collected the amount as tax and given it as equity. Right. Similarly, this happened in the Commonwealth Games, in the run-up to the Commonwealth Games. It happened in Bombay Airport also. And I think one of the main reasons is also not only because of government, but also because we have so many public sector banks. And if you look at the level of NPAs over there...
Crony banking, actually, somebody said that it's called crony banking. We are now joined in by Mr. Ajay Dua, former Secretary of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry in the Government of India. Welcome, Mr. Dua. Mr. Dua, you have been a bureaucrat, you have held very important positions. Crony capitalism and bureaucracy. One of the linkages which are spoken about when we talk of crony capitalism is the business, the corporates, politicians, bureaucracy. You have been around for quite some time. How have you seen this growing?
I think the incidence of crony capitalism, by which I understand as letting your friends and people you know make money, that's the trait of capitalism. And how does that happen? Whenever
make money and share money.
Well, if they do, then they are being socialists. They are not being capitalists. If they keep
share with each other, I meant.
Well, that is incestuous. All that I wanted to say is crony capitalism comes about when you try and control too many things. Through a system of control, probably you are adding to the paucity or the scarcity of that commodity or of what could be a natural resource, what could be...
Sorry, Mr. Dua. When the liberalization came into this country in the early 90s, we were told that it was the end of the license control Raj. Things are going to take different shape now. People are going to be much freer to do business. There are not going to be any such controls of licenses and things like that. But what the crony capitalism which we're talking about has only grown further and further in the last 2 decades.
True, but not in the case of licensing. The point I'm trying to make, Girish, is something like this, that when you had controlled everything, including licenses for manufacturing of commodities, then the person or the party to whom you gave that license, you were adopting or resorting to crony capitalism, because you were not waiting for all the applications which could be made. You hadn't put them on. There were no websites at that time, etc. Somebody who came to know, you gave him the license. So that was it might have been even preempting, but I would call that crony capitalism, because you had a regular too many things you were trying to control. Similarly, now if natural resources, whether it is by way of spectrum or it's by way of coal or any other commodity, when there is an excess demand for compared to a supply or the availability, crony capitalism tends to come up. And where does it happen? It usually happens in the initial stages when you do not know the value of the commodity which you are putting out for allotment. I give you an example. Between 2G and 3G spectrum, clearly 3G went through the route of auction. Before that, a company was involved to determine how do you go about auctioning, and the 3G really set out the benchmark for the value of the spectrum. It is only when the 3G spectrum's valuation was known, that is when the Auditor General and others, everybody came into the picture saying, if 3G can have such a value, then why did we allow 2G to take place at, or we allotted it at such and such rates, which were extremely lower. The point I am trying to make is that we have to be very careful in determining what is being granted by the government or by a regulator, whether that commodity is in scarce, or is there a greater demand for it than the availability.
Okay, Professor Arun Kumar, coming to the aspect of growth, Raghuram Rajan says that crony capitalism affects growth. How does it affect growth?
You see, what happens is
because we are told that you allow free competition, free market, growth will be taken care of on its own.
You see, crony capitalism in some sense is part of capitalism. You see, even if you see in America, for instance, there's crony capitalism. For instance, Enron with Mr. Bush, that is a famous case. There are many other cases. Siemens has been caught bribing. Walmart has been caught bribing. There are all kinds of cases where Google and Amazon, etc., now located their headquarters in Ireland to avoid taxes. And there is a mix between the Republicans, who don't want these laws to be changed, the Democrats. There's a lot of lobbying in America, with the powerful interests of the businesses. They manage to control a lot of, regulation, etc. So that's at one level that, this kind of capitalism is part of crony capitalism. So it's not as if it's separate. It's not to do with only controls, not to do with only taxation, etc. But it's a way the systems are manipulated and politics becomes a part of it. Now look at India, for instance. In India, the number of scams has been going up exponentially. Up to 1991, in the 80s, there were only 8 scams. But between 91 and 96, there were 26 major scams. And up to 1991, the maximum amount involved was Bofors, 64 crores. But between 91 and 96, out of the 26 scams, 13 were above 1,000 crores. And Harshad Mehta scam, which was the biggest of that time, Janki Raman Committee estimated to be 3,128 crores, right? And then a student of mine who's working on the period 2005 to 2008 has found 150 major scams. And we're defining major scams in terms of scams which appear on the front pages of the newspapers. Okay? So now there's one scam a week, and now we're talking about 10,000 crores and, hypothetically 50,000 crores and 1 lakh crores and above. So the number of scams is growing as the liberalization has taken place, as, more free environment is taking place, etc. But what's the impact? The impact of these scams being revealed is that now suddenly decision making has stopped, has slowed down. Because there's a threat. The business community feigns a threat because 2G was reversed, coal may be reversed, other things may be. So you make a business decision and your investment doesn't go through. Politicians are not taking decisions because they're scared. Bureaucrats are not taking decisions because they're scared that they may be caught. So you see, the reason why crony capitalism has slowed down growth in India is that investment decisions have slowed down because we haven't got a model of a market-based investment system. And that requires a new model. That new model has not yet come, which would be market-based investment based on profitability of investment, etc. Here, what is happening is profitability is not determined by the market, but it's determined by my contract system. If I know the right minister, I get 2G. If I know the right minister, I get coal allocations. If I know the right ministers, I may be getting CWG things, etc. Or contracts of road building or whatever has been mentioned earlier. So it is this which slows down because investment does not come. Investment is very uncertain. And if your return is not certain, then you are not going to invest. So even though liquidity is there, what is Raghuram Rajan saying? That we have eased liquidity, we have lowered SLR, 40,000 crores additional was available, but it's not being picked up. Why would it be picked up? If you look at the corporate sector, they have 2,50,000 crores of reserves, which they're not investing. Public sectors there, they have 3 lakh crores of reserves, which they're not investing. So there are not enough profitable opportunities because people feel the risk of investment in India has increased.
Okay, Mr. Didar Singh, Dr. Didar Singh, the question is this, that you earlier said that nobody wants crony capitalism. You want clear-cut policies. As Professor Arun Kumar was now pointing out, that we don't have, there have been a lot of problems about that. But the fact of the matter is that we keep hearing, keep reading, we keep, we hear people talking about it, that on the one hand, the industry, the corporates say that we want good policies, level playing field and things like that. But there are always a few corporates, a few influential corporates, few influential businessmen who manage to get the policies tweaked to their advantage. How does the larger business community manage to manage this? How are you going to deal with this?
Let's be a little bit fair on sort of putting one brush across all of business community. First of all, we've just heard, and you were mentioning it yourself, that this is a global phenomenon. Even in a country like the US, which claims to be so transparent and democratic, there are this so-called crony capitalism happens. I think even in today's lecture or yesterday's lecture, whatever, when Dr. Raghuram Rajan talked about crony capitalism, he made a very interesting point there. He talked about the shortage in a developing economy or an emerging economy like India, and he talked about even services, public services not being available to the common man. Because of these shortages, even to transcend and go through the system, you use politicians or whatever other contact to be able to manage it. And this is what brings the entire context of the economy and the running on day-to-day services into, a governance model which has various strains coming on it. We are a poor country, it happens. I mean, you can even say security. I mean, does anybody say that security shouldn't be there? And yet there are a large number of incidents that happen all the time. So there will always be aberrations. But in terms of business's view on crony capitalism, I think it's very, very clear. Business certainly wants a level playing field, certainly wants a market-driven economy which is transparent and open. And I beg to differ on this whole business of infrastructure. Our PPP model in India is one of the most mature and most developed models. The contracting system is completely on international competitive bidding. And if this kind of model is followed across the board in all sectors, you will reduce chances of so-called crony capitalism or favoritism. We in FICCI, for example, we've done a major report with Ernst & Young on corruption and how this whole thing, question of ethics and how it works. We've had an ethics committee which has said what all members should follow in terms of their practices. So overall, business is completely supportive of a ethics-based, a governance-based, a democratic-based, open and transparent system.
Okay.
But there will be aberrations, and that is what we have to address. We have to see how we can manage to go beyond them and actually get into more transparent way of bidding and putting everything out, whether it's natural resources, whether it's public services, in a transparent platform.
Okay. Mr. Dua, Professor Anand Kumar raised a very important issue. He said we need to have a new model because the businesses, they are not going according to the market conditions. They are just, who is connected to whom is what decides, what businesses people are getting into. Like we have seen in the 2G case that, builders getting into telecom and all kinds of things happening there. So, has there been any attempt at the government's level to, for any sort of a discussion on these matters, how to go about doing these things, or is everybody very complacent about the whole thing and very happy with how things are?
Mr. Nikam, let me distinguish between malfeasance, corruption and crony capitalism. I think we are mixing up corruption with crony capitalism. Corruption
to some extent, it is connected.
Partly it is. But the fact of the matter is crony capitalism is more a term used when a favor is being granted by a person or a system which is in position and it usually happens with respect to things which are in short supply compared to the demand or availability for it. I just give you an example. As a government, every action of government need not lead to crony capitalism unless you go through an auction process, which is what is everybody is advocating. I give you an example. If near the borders, the government says ex-military men or people who are used to living in those conditions, we want to allot land to them because they add to the security and they are able to be of value to public service. There you are looking for people.
No, that is okay. That is fine. That is not
similarly in the desert. If you want to increase the cultivable land,
I'm sure nobody is
so the point is what I'm trying to say is that malfeasance which can lead or which is like crony capitalism is usually with respect to things which are in short supply.
Okay.
We have to be dealing with how do you allocate a particular service, a particular asset which is in short supply, and I come back to what I said a little bit earlier. We need to know what is its true market price.
Okay.
And then find a system to allot it.
Okay, all three of you quickly, we are running out of time. How do we curb this?
See, we need to go for a market-based
Is
model.
there going to be?
Transparent.
Do you think that in the coming years, the coming months and years, there'll be any attempts on how to curb this?
See, if this new government has to get investment going, then it has to move away from this model. For that, what they have to do is go for a more transparent system than what we have had, where the political influence on decision making is reduced. It's a very huge influence that is there, and that's why businessmen want to manipulate it. And we have to distinguish between the micro and the macro. At the macro level, everybody knows this crony capitalism is hurting the economy, but at the micro level, each businessman thinks, I can gain an advantage by doing this.
Okay.
In my view, this crony capitalism can only be curbed if there is transparent price discovery mechanisms, and the point is that it is a factor at the very top of business and it is a factor at the very bottom of business. Everybody is involved, and it is a mixture between corruption and cronyism, but cronyism dominates in a system where government allocates.
Girish, some good things have happened. For example, we have seen Subrata Roy of Sahara get into jail.
Exactly.
We have seen Jignesh Shah being imprisoned. So things are improving.
So you think is there a correction happening already?
There is much more vigilance because we are a democratic setup. I agree with Dilip that we require more thoroughgoing reforms, market reforms. We also need the government to be we require more people of integrity in the government. There is no substitute for that. If you have so much of corruption in the judiciary, God help you. So we require also reforms in the judiciary so that there is speedier dispensation of justice, so that the things that happen, the aberrations can be corrected well in time. Okay. So I would not lose heart. I'm saying that this is all work in progress.
Okay, it's a work in progress, and as Vivian rightly pointed out, we have seen in the last couple of years so many businessmen landing in jail and continuing to remain in jail without even a bail. Maybe there is some kind of a correction happening there, but as all my panelists pointed out, there are larger issues which needs to be tackled if the larger problem has to be tackled. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Ajay Dua, Didar Singh, Professor Arun Kumar, Dilip Cherian and Vivian Fernandes. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in Big Picture same time tomorrow.